All right. Let's go back. Let me refresh the stream and we'll start. Okay. Any other questions?
Can you share your
Share my code.
your
Okay.
solution?
Okay. I will. I won't delete this. I will.
We like it better.
Yeah. This is better.
It's just what we're used to see. Like it's when I want, at least for me, I can't speak for everybody else, but like when I look at the solutions, they're just yours are much easier to read.
Oh, much easier to read. All right. Streaming link. All right. So I think I've already lost my voice by now. So. All right. All right. I'm going to close this out and then we will come back to our. So it's not going to be databases today. Um, all right. So let's see. Okay. So week 13. As I said on Thursday, the next 3 weeks are a little bit more challenging, and the reason is we have studied everything in isolation. We did our databases, we did our Node.js, we did our front end. These 3 weeks, we are going to bring everything together. This week, we are going to look at Node.js the way Node.js is popular for. Okay, to be honest, the applications that we are doing were necessary for you to have a good understanding for Node.js. Okay, but in real life, that's not what Node.js is used for. But it's going, all those concepts are going to help you understand this better. Right? Node.js became popular for creating servers, for creating web server code. Okay, so this week we are going to be looking at how do we create web servers using Node.js. Right? Before Node.js, we still use Java, C Sharp, Python, or any other backend languages to create the same thing. Okay, Node.js became more popular because of JavaScript, right? People who already knew JavaScript, it was easy transition them to write some backend code using Node.js. Okay, so let's go ahead and go through this presentation. All right, so come on. Okay, the first. Oh, saw a message. This is the new OS. I unfortunately updated my OS to Catalina, and now I'm getting all those weird permission issues. We'll fix that. Okay. Um, all right. So I already talked about this. All right. So I'm not going to touch base on Express today. We'll look at Express on Tuesday. But today, what important is that you understand the concept very well. Okay. The coding part, again, trust me, is a little bit easier. Okay, it's not easy, but more important is you need to understand the concept that we are doing today. Okay, this is the foundation, and this is what Node.js is used for. So if you don't understand this part, it's not easy to use Node.js. Okay, um, Express. If you remember, we are learning the MERN stack, MERN. Okay, so the E over there is Express, and we are going to create some applications using Express as well. Okay, when we talk about Node.js, you will always hear Express. Node.js and Express kind of go hand in hand together. All right, they are the same thing. If you go back 15 years ago, JavaScript and jQuery, they used to go hand in hand together, right? Anybody who used JavaScript was using jQuery. The only thing is, what does jQuery do? It makes a little bit easier to write some of the JavaScript code. That's the exact same thing that Express does. Can I do everything that Express gives me in Node.js? Yes. Okay. Is it going to be a little bit trickier? Yes. So that's why Express comes in. People usually don't want to deal with it. And then somebody created a package called Express, became really popular. Now everybody uses Express. Okay. But remember, today we are going to look at from the perspective of Node.js. Every single thing that we do in Express can be done with vanilla Node.js or vanilla JavaScript. Okay. Express is just a third-party library. Um, the good example would be, remember I showed you how to make a Ajax request in JavaScript. I don't know if you guys went back. I uploaded my code as well. We were using XML HTTP request function or something. If you go back, look at week number 3 or 4. Then we looked at jQuery. jQuery had a really easy function called Ajax, $.ajax, and you would make an Ajax request. Okay, this is the same thing. I'm going to show you how to do the same thing in Node.js today. And then on Tuesday, when we look at Express, you will see it's extremely easy. It's just like one function call, it does everything for you. Okay, but it is important as developers that we understand what is going beneath. All right, we understand how do we do it in Node.js. Okay, a lot of companies, if they're using Node.js, they use Express. But there might be somebody who's like, oh no, I'm like an elite programmer. I'm not going to use any third-party libraries. I'm going to write everything in Node.js. So we need to understand that. How do we do that? Okay. All right. Um, some of the what I was talking about, the concept wise, that's number 3. I want you guys to make sure that you understand the concept that we are doing. The coding part will come, okay? But if you don't understand the concept, it's going to be really difficult to understand what am I actually coding for. All right. I know some of you guys have study groups. If not, this would be a better time. All right. Oh yeah. So I have a subscription for ProverSite. I think it's like $35 per month. Again, there are other free. Go to Free Code Camp. You don't have to pay for anything, or you can sign up for a trial. I think they have like 7 or 2 weeks trial. Quickly go through the course if you want. Looks like there's. I haven't done it personally, but ProverSite itself is really good. Um, so I use it a lot, but it's like $35 or $40 per month. Okay, you can sign up free trial, go through this course, at least the express one, after this one. Okay, let's see if I can. Let's jump over here. Okay, so before we actually can start creating web servers, let's recap, make sure that we understand what is a server. Okay, when we started Node.js, that's what we touched based on, right? Anybody wants to take a stab at it? What is a server? Yes.
Isn't it like the hardware that's running the database?
Hardware that is running the database. Hardware is good. Database, yes and no. No as in it runs more than database, but it does run some database as well. Okay. So anybody else? Hardware. So what does it mean when Goose is saying database or when I say some other stuff? What part am I talking? Hardware, I get it. What's the other part? Arena? What did he say?
You store that on your data.
All your data. Okay. What can we have a general name for? What are we talking about?
Database?
What is it? No. It's nothing to do with anything particular. So I said, who said server is a hardware? Okay. And then it has something else like database. What else? What can we generalize this into?
Software.
Software. Okay. So all of these, your database, your code, your connections, all of this is basically some code, right? Some software. So a server is a combination of two things, both of them, hardware and software. Okay. So in today's world, we don't have to worry about the hardware part. Okay. And why? Anybody know why we don't have to worry about the hardware part? Everything is up in the sky, all right? Everything is in cloud. So what we have to worry about is getting a subscription to AWS, GCP, which is Google Cloud, or Azure, Microsoft, one of those three, or other private cloud ownerships, okay? They are the ones who are giving us the hardware. Again, remember, a server cannot exist without an hardware. Today, these are the companies that are actually renting us that hardware, okay? Previously, 10, 15 years ago, I still remember we used to have a hardware team. We had to tell them in like 3 to 4 months in advance that we need a server that we are going to deploy our code in. They would go out, bid, buy those hardware machines, and then say, hey, after 4 months, hey, your server is here. And you would, oh no, that's not what I requested. I said this much. All right, 4 more months. So today we don't have to worry about the hardware part. It was really a pain. I'm not even joking. That's how much time it would take. So you don't have to worry about the hardware part, but behind the scene, we still need to recognize, even though everything is in the cloud, somebody has those physical hardwares. Okay. All right. The second part is a software. All right. So that is what we are going to be concentrating on the class. Again, the hardware part, we already get it. We have some free cloud providers. We are going to look at Heroku. So they give us the hardware where we can deploy our apps. So what we need to do is we need to worry about the code that goes into that hardware. Okay. Even with what I was saying like 10 years ago, they would give us the literally the box with the hardware stuff. We still had to put our program, our software in it to make sure this is working. It's the same today as well. AWS, GCP, Azure will give you the hardware. You still need to deploy some code, right? You need to deploy some server code that is going to perform as a server. Okay. So for today, well, at least for today, our server is not going to be anything in the cloud. It's going to be our computer, our laptop, our personal machines. Okay, they are going to act as a server, and then we are going to deploy the code onto our laptop, onto our machines, and they are going to start running web servers. Okay, on Tuesday we will do an exercise like a small project, and then I'm going to show you how to deploy it to Heroku, and this means that hardware will be provided by Heroku. For today, the hardware is our laptops. We're going to write some code and deploy it to our laptops. Okay, but again, remember the server consists of hardware and also the coding part. Okay, so the machine and the code. All right, any questions? Everybody clear? Understand? Good. All right. So what does a server do? What are some of the server side functions? All right. Visiting a URL and being presented by an HTML page. That HTML page is coming from a server. Okay, remember that. All right. This is the software portion of the server. If an HTML page is coming from the server, what does this mean? I need to create that HTML page on my server. Okay. Remember that. API endpoint, that's also coming from the server. The API endpoint and an HTML page, the difference is the first one is going to give you HTML, the second one is going to give you JSON, all right, or XML, but we won't worry about that right now. Okay, so if my server has the capability to create an API and provide JSON, what am I doing? I am responsible for that. Okay, because I am the one who's writing the server side code. Okay, and the top two things over here on the slide are that my server should be able to give HTML pages and some JSON, both of those things. Okay, so this means that we as a programmer have to write code on our server that gives us HTML pages and JSONs. Okay, and we'll take a look how do we do that, but those are the things that we are providing. Okay, third, fourth, and fifth are more, if it's a production app, it can do some other things also. Okay, it can provide a PDF, looks like some image processing, some relevant searches, but that's not as important right now. The important part is in our project, in our course, our server that we are going to create should be able to give us a HTML page and JSON. Okay, this means I'm creating the front end and I'm creating the back end API endpoints. All right, this is the moment where we are starting to create APIs. Okay, any questions? Everybody understand the concept, what my server needs to do? Okay, let's see what else we got. Now, what is a client? That should be pretty easy. Client is what is a client? More specific. User, yeah. But who's in our case, if we have a server and all that stuff, what is it? It's a browser. Okay. Again, remember from previous week I said client is always for us is going to be a browser, right? Why is it going to be a browser? Because we are going to get request to our server from our browser. Okay, you're going to type in www.something.com, and then the request goes to a server. Okay, and it does something and returns something. Okay, so in our case, the client is going to be a browser. Okay, now when we talk about client and server, we talk about request and response. Okay, request and response are always from the client side. What I mean is, when I talk about request, this means a client is sending me a request. Okay, a client is sending a request to the server. Okay, when I talk about response, this means the server is sending the response back. Okay, these are concept wise also true, and in the code we are going to be using variables called request and response. Just understand this is what it means. Request variable means that all this request is coming from the web browser or a client. Okay, response is whatever am I sending from my server back. Okay, everybody understand that? Because this is the most confusing part. It's from the concept, everybody gets it, but when we start coding, we will be using the same variable names, request and response. Okay, again, remember, request is what the data, whatever the request that the browser is sending or the client is sending to you. Okay, and the response is what you are responding as a server. Okay, so if I am expecting any data in my server from the browser, I should be parsing the request variable or the request. Okay, everything that is coming from the browser will be over here. And then when I'm done parsing everything, I have done some functions, and I need to give some new data to my client. I need to put it in the response. Okay, I cannot switch it around. You cannot put the response, whatever you did in the request, and expect it's going to reach your client. It's not going to work. Okay, the only thing that is going to reach your client is whatever you have inside over here. Okay, and whatever your client has over here, this is going to come and reach you. Okay, any questions? Everybody understand? All right, request and response. So request always comes from the client. Response is what you send it back to the client. Okay, now how do the client and server communicate with each other? Request and response or HTTP, right? Remember, when you're typing in a URL, you have to type in HTTP. HTTP is a protocol. What it means is, this is the mechanism, this is the way you talk between your client and server. Okay, I mean, it's called internet, but from the software world, from the engineering perspective, this is the only way you can talk between your client and server. Okay, I would say only way. There are other protocols, but if you want to communicate over the internet, you need to use HTTP. There are a few more. For example, there's a file transfer protocol. It's called FTP. It's kind of similar to HTTP, but it's not on the internet. It is only used for transferring some files from a client to a server. Okay, we won't worry about it, but I'm saying that there are other protocols. But in our case, when we are creating a web server, the communication is through HTTP or HTTPS. Okay, does anybody know the difference between HTTP and HTTPS? What is it?
It's the HTTPS is
Secure.
Usually it has like an SSL certificate.
Right. Okay. So for now, since we'll be running all the code in our local host, we don't have to worry about the security right now. But that's the difference between those two. Okay.
Shouldn't you just use HTTPS?
You should, but there's an extra step that goes into it. You have to install some certificates to make it secure. It's a little bit more painful, but for our purposes, since everything is running locally on our computer, so we don't have to worry about it. Once we deploy it, all the cloud providers, they kind of take care of the HTTPS part for us, so we don't have to worry about it. Okay. All right. So from the perspective of the course, we covered. We haven't done React.js, but we'll come to that. But we have covered the HTML, JavaScript part, and then today we are going to start creating our backend servers using Node.js. Okay. All right. Already talked about Express. Okay. So we already understand that what servers are. They are basically hardwares, and they are providing. Today they are being provided by some different companies. Talked about the AWS, Heroku. What I want to get is okay. So, any questions so far? Everybody understand who are the cloud providers, where the hardware is coming from, and for today, where our hardware is coming from? It's our local machines. Okay. So we are going to be creating web servers, and we are going to just deploy it to our local machines, and then we'll be accessing from the browser. Okay. And eventually, we'll see how to use Heroku and where everybody can access those. Yes.
So if we create our own server, would that mean we wouldn't have to have like a GoDaddy or something like that?
So that is called hosting. Once you have your server, yes, then you will have to get a hosting like a URL. That's where it will run. Yes. For example, once we get to Heroku, Heroku gives its free URLs, but the problem with that is those are randomly generated names. So you will see some weird names, and that would be a URL. But if you don't want that, yes, you can buy those URLs and then post your code over there. Okay, but the code is exactly going to be the same. So we need to worry about the code first. What it needs to do. Okay. All right. Let's see how do we build a server. Um, okay. All right. So let's suppose we have acquired the hardware. All right, we have the hardware now. As engineers, we need to write some code to make it actually a server, like a web server. Okay. The first thing your server needs to do is listen. What is it listening for? It is listening for incoming requests. Okay? Remember the client and the server concept? Your client is going to make a request, the request is going to come to your server, right? So your server should be listening for those requests. The first thing when you create a server is add a functionality that is going to be listening for those incoming requests. Okay? If your server is not listening for incoming requests, nothing else over here matters. Okay? Why? Because it's just a box that is out there, it's not doing anything. Okay? So the first thing is your server should be up and running and always listening. Okay? If your server is not listening, all the requests that come into it are going to fail. Okay? So the first part, you need to add some code to make our server listen for incoming requests. Now the incoming requests could be our HTML pages, right? Somebody is looking for an HTML page, home.html or contacts.html, right? The request is going to come over here. If the server is listening, it will say, oh, okay, a request came in and I need to do something about it. Same with the APIs, all right? All your APIs, all your HTML resides over here somewhere. We'll get to that, okay? But the first thing is your server should be listening, okay? Once your server is listening, it should be able to parse the URLs, okay? A request comes in for something slash home.html, or there's an API and the request comes in for slash API slash some ID. Okay. So two calls comes in. Your server should be able to parse those URLs and understand what the user is asking, what your client is asking, right? In the first case, your server should give an HTML that should render a page, a home page. In your second case, it should give a JSON object back so that somebody can use it. Okay, so that's where the URL parsing comes in. Your server should be able to listen. Once it is listening, it should be able to understand what the user is asking. Basically, it should be able to parse the URL. Okay? The next thing, route handling. You should be able, your server should be able to give the right page back to your client. For example, if you have home and then you have contact and then you have what else? What's the third one? Just about. Okay. So your server should be able to parse the URL and then route those requests accordingly. Okay. If your request comes in for the contact, it should have some conditions so that it only gives this page back. Okay. If it comes for home, it should give only the home page back. All right. So it should be able to route those requests accordingly and correctly. Right. Okay. Again, whatever I'm talking, this is the code that we need to write. Your server right now is just the black box, just the hardware. All of these boxes are what we need to fill in. Okay, we need to write code where our server listens, where our server parses the URL, also is able to handle the routing part. Okay. All right, once it's able to route correctly, it should either send HTML or JSON. That's what we are going to be looking at. Okay. If I'm asking for a JSON, it shouldn't give me an HTML back. If I'm asking for an HTML page, it shouldn't give me a JSON back. Okay. Why? Because my client is expecting something, is going to get incorrect information. All right. So all these things also, we need to write some HTML, we need to write some JSON, and we need to send accordingly once the route has been handled. Okay. My server should be able to know what to do. All right. Receive post. Anybody wants to take a guess what this means? Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna just find this information, but posting data to this server,
Yes, exactly. Okay.
and then another one was, I know there's get, and then
There's put, delete. Okay, that's correct. Raymond, did you have anything? Did you raise your hand? Oh no. Oh, you were doing this. Okay. Okay. Oh, that's what you were saying. Yes, that's exactly what Kelly is saying that post is. Post means that your server should be able to receive the data and process it, right? What is all? The other thing is that you send a request to your server and it sends you a HTML back. Okay, those are called GET requests. You are just getting some information. You are sending a request to the server and the server is like, okay, I'm going to return you just HTML, I'm going to return you some JSON data, and that's it. Post means that the client has some data on its side, right? For example, user information, item information. We just did the bidding one. Okay, some information that it has captured on its side, and it wants to send that information to the server and wants the server to basically store that information. Okay, so when a request that comes in that has data inside it, right? Those are called post requests. So your server should be able to handle requests that have data inside it. Okay, and what does my data look like? If I'm sending data back in JSON, what is my server expecting data to look like in JSON, right? So if my server should be able to send the JSON back and also receive the JSON back. Okay, that's what this means. So my server should be able to send the JSON and receive the JSON. And I am limiting it to JSON because that's what we will be learning. Companies are using JSON, kind of shifted to JSON format as well. Okay, but I hope you understand that it could be different format, for example, XML, or if a new format comes in, what it just means is that it should be able to receive some data. Right now, we are just learning JSON, so that's why I'm saying it should be able to send the JSON data back to the client and also receive JSON data from the client. Okay? All right. Once I have all the data and everything, I should be able to do something with that data. Now, what does server-side logic mean? It could be storing it to my database. Okay, that's my server should be able to do that. I need to perform some calculations. My server should be able to do that. I need to delete some rows, add some rows, update some rows. All that complex logic, everything resides on my server side. Okay? Anything that is not part of this comes over here. Okay? Calculations, parsing, sorting, anything that is required that should be performed on the data should be on your server side. Your server should be able to handle all that logic as well. Okay? All right. Any questions? I know this is a lot, but this is the most important slide before we actually start coding. Okay? Because we are going to be coding every single thing that you see. We are going to start with listening. We're going to parse the URL. We're going to do route handling, send HTML, send JSON, all this stuff. Okay? All the database logic kind of comes over here. All right? Today we won't be looking at databases, but eventually we'll get to the part where we should be able to store our information in the database on our server. Today, my goal is to at least come to this part. We'll see if we can get to receive post, but that's what it is. Okay, so all of these functionality as a full stack developer, as a backend developer, when you're creating a web server, you need to do all of them. Okay, otherwise it doesn't work. Your server doesn't actually do anything. All right, any questions? No questions? Some questions? What is it? What is and more? So you don't see update, you don't see delete over here. That kind of could be one. So you see the get, HTTP get, HTTP post. Two more are HTTP updates, HTTP delete. That could be part of that, and we're going to take a look at that as well. Okay, those are the and authentication. Authentication is a big deal. Right now we are not studying authentication, but if you have a web server, you want to make sure it's secured. So all type of authentication that also resides on your server. Okay, they should be secured. Any code for authentication that also resides on your server. Logging. So what happens is requests are coming in, something happens, errors are happening. How do you look for those errors? You need to log those things, right? So your server, remember the file stream thing in Node.js? That's what it is used for. So what your server does is it logs all the operations, okay, what is going on, so that if it's something bad happens, you can go back. Programmers as engineers, we look at those logs and try to understand what happened, and try to see if we can fix those. Okay, so those would be some of the examples that we would have to put in and more. Okay. All right. Any other questions? No questions? I think that should be end of the slide. Yeah. All right. Any questions? Everybody understand clearly what a server is, what it should be doing, because the next part is coding. If you clearly understand this, coding will just take you, there's a learning curve, but it should be okay as long as you understand these concepts. That what am I trying to do? Okay. All right. No questions. So let's go ahead and jump into coding now. All right. Let me close this out. Oh, I closed the IDE. So what I'm going to do is we'll create our web server. This is going to run on our local host. Oh, I didn't create a folder for this. Seriously? No. Sorry, I can't code unless it is all organized. There. All right. So let's create our first server. Okay. Let me just create a JavaScript file. We'll call it JS server.js, and we'll go ahead and start coding over here. All right. So as I said, Node.js has built-in functionality to create web servers, and that's why Node.js is actually known for. So today I'm going to show you the built-in libraries that are present in Node.js, so you don't have to do any npm install anything. Okay, just like our fs module, the file stream one, we have a library package called http. Right? I don't know if you guys remember when I was showing the documentation, I said, oh, this is one more. We're going to be using that. Okay, so go to the documentation of a Node.js and you can look up functions that are part of that module. Right? It's called http. Right? So since we are going to be using a module, first thing we need to do is import that module, and we will do require, and it's called HTTP. Okay. So once my web server is up and running, I need a URL, right? And what is going to be the URL when I run it locally on my computer? It's going to be local HTTP / localhost, and then I need a port number as well. Okay, so I'm going to create a port, and this can be any number, right? More popular port number you will see on localhost are 8080 by default, but this can be anything. It could be 7000, it could be 7500, 8000, doesn't matter. You just need a port number. Okay. Um, but I think the validity is it has to be 2 digits or more. Usually you will see 4-digit port numbers. Okay, so I'm going to be using the port number 8080, and once we have this, I'll create another one on a different port so that you guys can see that as well. Okay, so now we're going to create our server. So I'm going to create a variable called server. Again, these are variables, you can call them anything you want. In your HTTP module that we just imported, there is a convenient function called create server. That's it. Okay, so this function comes in Node.js built in, and this is what is you're going to do to create our server. Okay, now what is the first thing that a server should do? Remember from the diagram, what is it? Listen. Right? So our server is created, but it's not listening. So we need to make sure that our server is up and running, is listening. If it is not listening, nothing else matters. Nothing is going to work. Okay? So once you have created your server, you are going to call pretty easy method called listen. It's called listen. Okay? Listen takes in 2 parameters. If you saw, the help kind of came up. The first one is the port number it should be listening on. Okay? And then a callback function that when it starts listening on that port number, what do you want it to do? Okay, well, we just want it to, we'll just console log a message and say, oh, to make sure this is successful, this console log saying server listening on, say http ://local host, because I know this is going to be my URL, right? And then port number. So let's see. Okay, so you create a server, and then the first most important part is listening. So you say server.listen. If this is all good, you should see this message. And then if you go to this website, the website that your server is hosted on, right now it's hosted on localhost. If you go to this website, you should be able to see, it should not give you an error. It'll be a blank page because it doesn't do anything, right? We'll come back and fix it, but it shouldn't say 404 or not found 500. You shouldn't get any errors. Okay, let's quickly run this. Make sure that it's working. Okay, So successful, no error messages, and I can just command. I like this command click. This opens up on. Okay. It's not doing anything, it just comes up. And the reason is I haven't actually done anything. It's just listening on it. So it just keeps listening. My browser is not sending anything. So my server doesn't know what to do. But what is happening is I have created a web server that is up and running, right? It is listening to any requests that come in. Okay? Doesn't do much, but we'll fix that just like with a couple of more lines. Okay? But this is how you create a basic web server, right? These are all built in into Node.js, into their HTTP module. Again, the more important parts are you need to have a port number, and then the two methods create server, and then listen. Okay, let's complete one more thing because it doesn't do anything, and then we'll see. Well, I'll open up for questions. Okay, now remember the request and the response. Okay, so we are going to use that now. So back to your create server, right? If you look at the documentation, it is expecting a function, and the function will be executed when it starts listening. When the request comes in, what do you want to do? All that code goes over here. Okay, if a request comes in, what do I want to do? If I want to send a response back to my client, what do I want to do? All of that code goes inside these parentheses. Okay, so this parentheses is expecting a function, a callback function with two arguments, request and response. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and create a function. I'm doing this so that you guys can see it. We'll call it handle requests. Okay, and as I said, it expects two parameters. The first one is always going to be request. The second one is always going to be response. Okay, again, I hope everybody understand you can name this anything you want. You can do rec, res, same thing. Okay, if you want to play a trick on somebody, you can do res, rec. Thoroughly confusing. Okay, but don't do it. The first one is always going to be a request. Okay, and the second one is going to be response. Okay, again, remember the request will have all the data that is coming from my client from the browser. Response is I'm going to fill the response over here in my code. What I mean by that is this is the data that I want my client to receive. Okay, so request coming from the client. If I want to send something back, response. Okay, so we are going to add this function over here, handle request. Just like a callback function, you could do the exact same thing using this thing. Okay, it's the same thing as this, but for now, just for clarity, I'm going to create a function separately and then call this over. Okay, now I create a server. When it starts listening, my requests are going to come in over here and my response is going to go over here. Okay, for now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just send a response back, and I'm going to, when my request comes in, I'm just going to say like hello world so that I can see something on the page. Okay, the function is called response.end. all right, this variable has a function called end. What it means is I have completed everything. My server is done with processing everything. All right. And this is what I want you to send it back. Okay. Once this is complete, let's say hello world from URL, just to show you what the request, one of the parameters in request is dollar request.url. Okay, we'll use this. So your request, the more widely one that we are going to be looking at today, your request variable has two properties, URL and method. URL will have the URL of the client that is coming to your server, the request that is coming into your server, and the method. Method would be get, post, update, delete, what the client is trying to do. Okay? So for now, if this is successful, I should get get a URL, and the URL should be localhost, right? http://localhost, and then I'm going to create a response. So this is my server side, and I'm going to send this thing back to my client. Okay, and now if you run this on your web page, you should be able to see this request. Okay. Um, Opening terminal. .js. Okay, server is listening. Now if you go back to this URL and this here, this is, so my client went to this URL, right? This is my server URL. This is what the URL my server is on. That's where my server is located. Okay, it goes to that URL. It comes over here. My server got the request. Okay, and my server said, oh, send this back to this thing. Okay. This slash thing will go over it. This is actually the URL. This is called the path. Okay, we'll go over it in a bit, but the basic thing is you created a server. Let me go ahead and close this out. All right, one more thing. If you are not in the habit of deleting this thing over here, if you are in a habit of closing this, remember you started a server on this port. Unless you delete it, it's going to keep working. Okay, and now if you try to spin up a new Node.js server with the same port, you might get an error saying, oh, something is already running on this port. Okay, what I like to do is I just press this delete button so that it closes my connection so that I don't get an error. So if you get an error, something like, oh, something is already listening on the port that you're mentioning, this means you have an instance that is already running that you forgot to close. Okay, very common error. So I'm going to delete this so my server stops running. And the check is if you refresh this, it's going to say cannot be reached. Why? Because I closed my server. My server is not listening. It's not up and running again. Okay. Now, before we proceed, any questions? Yes. So response.end is saying that I'm end. I have received a request. I'm done with it. This is my last response. Send this data back. Okay, this is my final response. Basically, that's what it is saying. That I am done with the processing. Right now, it's simple, but we'll take a look at it with the HTML pages. But basically, what it is saying is, from my server side, this is my communication. There's no request coming after this. Okay, so you're notifying your browser that, okay, I received your request, I processed it, and this is what I'm sending back to you. And there's nothing else coming after this. So basically, I'm closing the connection after this. Okay? So you will notice, you will hear the word what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, I can't remember it. Okay. So what the meaning of, when I remember that word, what it means is that your client and server are kind of, they're connected and they're disconnected in a way. The disconnection comes in when a request comes in, right? Your server processes the request, sends the response back, and that's it. That's the end of communication. Your server forgets you, forgets the client, and moves on. Okay? So when a new request comes in, a new response, a new everything starts from fresh again. Okay? There is no remembering between two requests. Your server does not remember the first request from the second one, from the third one. It processes the first request, responds it, and forgets about it, and deletes. Basically, there's nothing else now. The second response that comes in is going to be a new request. The third is going, every request that comes into your server, the server acts like it has never corresponded to you before. So that's why there's no, that you cannot use some variables that you think, oh, if my second request, I should have this data, it's not going to have the data. Every single request is a new request. Just remember that. We'll see some examples for it. Yes. Connectionless. Yes, that's what I. Okay. Yes, Chris.
So normally in the document, you're
putting like the HTML path or you're basically
Right, we'll get to it. Yes, yeah, basically that's what you're doing. Yes. Right now it's a simple string, but yes, you guessed it right. You will put your HTMLs, your APIs, your JSON data, everything. We'll see there are some good methods to do it, but we'll take a look at it in a minute. Okay, but this is a simple um, server that you can create. Okay, it has, yes, Josh.
I'm running the same code that you have up on the screen, and I keep getting response.end, generate property of end undefined.
It's a funny thing. I'm not I'm not being sarcastic or anything. It's the funniest thing when people tell me I'm running the exact same code, and I'm like, no, that's not exact. It's probably there's something. We'll take a look at it, but if you're getting that, then it's you're missing something. Probably not the exact same code. If it is not defined, either your variables are is it same sequence, everything is the same. We'll take a look at before. Let me complete this and we will move on to the exercise. Okay. All right. So I was saying that you can have multiple servers on the same code. For example, I mean you wouldn't generally do it. For example, um, I can create another port. Let's say port 2. Give it another port number. Let's say 7000. Okay. And then I create a new server. I say const server 2 http.create server. Okay, and then I need a function, so I'm going to create a second function over here. I'm going to say function handle request 2. Okay, request response. Okay, and then my response for my second one, let's say this is from second server on port what is my port number? Port 2. So let's say port 2. Okay, and then when I create my second, I can say handle request 2. All right, my first is already running. Let's go ahead and start the second one as well. Server 2 dot listen takes in 2 parameters. What was the issue, Ethan? See, not exact same code, right? All right, so console log and then run this saying server listening on http // localhost. Okay, and then this second is running on second port. Okay, usually you won't be doing it, but I just want to show you guys that different port numbers, you can have multiple servers, but you'll have to have handling them differently. So now let's go and run this to make sure this is running. Okay, so now I have 2 servers. One is running on 8080 and one is running on 7000. You see that? So if a request comes into port number 8080, it is going to say hello world. If a request comes in port number 7000, it's going to say this second request is coming from this one. Okay, so just test it out. If you go to localhost 8000, okay, hello world, and if I go to 7000, it comes to second request. Yes. Right. Yeah, that's what I was saying. Usually you will not be doing this. Yeah. But the point over here, what I'm trying to tell you is that Node.js has functionality which you can create more than one server. But yes, you're right. Usually you will just have one server that will be handling everything. Okay. So you can create as many servers as you want. Different port numbers. The port number should be just different, but that's how you do it. Okay, one code, multiple servers. Let me close this out and see. Any questions? Okay. If you were not following along, that's good. Let's go ahead. I'll give you a few minutes. Just replicate this code. Make sure everybody has a web server running, and then we'll look at some more practical things. We'll see how to pass back HTMLs. I don't know if we'll see JSON right now, but we'll look at some HTML. Start from there and create some web pages. Okay, but just make sure that you have a server running. You are able to send a string back. It shows up over there. Okay. Otherwise, the next steps are not going to work anyway. And then we'll jump on to see how do we pass in something more better like an HTML. So I'm just going to keep one. So I'm going to remove my second one. But if you're able to do the first one, this should be same thing. And I'll be building on top of this one. Okay. Please make sure every one of you is able to create and run this simple server. Every exercise is kind of built on top of this. All right, I'm going for a donut. When I'm done, hopefully everybody's done with creating a web server.
Take your time.
Oh, we're not. When are you like?